the Sermon on the Mount, or the Key to Christianity. An interpretation by Pekka Ervast. 4. The New Ethics of Jesus. Matt 5. 17. Think not that I came to destroy the law, or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. 18. Amen, I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass away from the law, till all forms be experienced. 19. Whosoever therefore shall break one of the following small commandments, and shall teach men so, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whosoever shall do and teach them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. 20. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. In the 17th verse you have written the word law with a capital L and put in brackets the adjoining words, all the prophets. This seems to me rather arbitrary. As you please. My intention was to make clear the purpose of the words. As to capitals, you probably know they are very little used in the printed Greek Gospel text, very seldom at the beginning of a sentence, only in names and accentuated words in the midst of a sentence. Manuscripts from the Middle Ages are of two kinds. The more recent ones are written throughout with small letters, the older and oldest ones throughout with capitals. The use of capitals and small letters is thus arbitrary and not founded on any originally sanctified manner of writing. In translation we cannot avoid differing even from the printed Greek text and following the Latin, which uses capitals in the same manner as modern languages. It is true enough that in the printed Greek and Latin texts the word law, ton nomen and legum, is written in small letters, but here, if anywhere, it would have been to the point to use a capital. Is it so important? Yes, for on it depends the right understanding of all that follows. What do you think Jesus meant by the word law? Isn't it self-evident? The law or the prophets, those words indicate that he was speaking of the law of Moses. But if Jesus were speaking of the law of Moses, how could he pretend that heaven and earth would pass away before the least tittle of the law? Jesus knew full well that the law of Moses regulated in detail the everyday life of the Jews, and he himself often went in opposition to the law, for instance, as to ablutions, hallowing the Sabbath, etc. And surely he well knew that other nations had other codes of law with different rules and regulations. Or else we make of Jesus an uneducated and unlearned fanatic. I never happened to think of that. It is a bad dilemma indeed. But what if Jesus, by the word law, meant only the so-called Decalogue or the 10 Commandments of God? But amongst them there is just the commandment to hallow the Sabbath. And why should Jesus have added the words or the prophets? Now I no longer follow you. I am rather anxious to know how you will explain it. The Greek word nomos signifies without doubt a man-made law, but Jesus, who spoke in Aramaic, was sure to use a word equivalent to the Hebrew Torah. The Jews, by the term Torah, certainly designated their whole code of laws, in the beginning the Pentateuch or the 5 books of Moses, later on both the books of Moses and the prophets. By the Torah, however, was understood not the man-made laws, but the law instituted by God. Torah was a holy term meaning first of all the moral law prevailing from the beginning of things, in nature and in life, and becoming known to men first through oracles and then through the prophets. Jesus was evidently speaking of this divine law, adding the words or the prophets in order to point out that the prophets, Moses amongst others, proclaimed and interpreted this divine law. The law is itself with God, but the prophets as mediators have made it known to men, and thus the prophets, from a human point of view, have constructed the law. Thus it may be said, the law or the prophets, meaning the divine law, or in other words, the prophets who have proclaimed it. Only from this point of view are we in a position to understand the words of Jesus. Not the least tittle of the divine law will indeed pass away so long as earth and heaven are in existence, because it is just that law which animates and sustains them. And likewise all forms of life, i.e. all the forms of the divine law of life proclaimed by the prophets in their respective religions, shall certainly be experienced, ere the divine law will empty itself or the least jot of it pass away. And therefore Jesus did not come to destroy the divine law, but to fulfill it, i.e. to give it a new interpretation. Have I succeeded in presenting my idea to you? I must confess you have enlightened the whole question in a most natural way, and I am rather inclined to believe that you have invented the right explanation. There was no need of inventing anything. You have only to read your text thoughtfully. In the following verse you have changed the word these into the following. Isn't that rather a free translation? By no means, for in all languages the word this refers to something present or just coming, not to something behind or bygone. I translate with the following for clearness' sake. It was impossible for Jesus to refer to the commandments and rules of all the prophets, so much the more as he spoke of them only at second hand. He spoke of the divine law proclaimed by the prophets differently at different times and in different nations. Now, as he himself also was a prophet, did he not tell his followers that they were like unto the prophets? He evidently proclaimed the divine law of life in his own way. And he calls their attention to this proclamation of his own, saying he would give them some commandment of his own not heard of heretofore. These commandments are dedicated to those who live in the kingdom of heaven. If you keep all my commandments, it is verily good, but if you think that breaking one of them is of no consequence, you immediately lessen your right of membership in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus does not, with any kind of punishment or banishment, threaten those who do not keep his commandments. He only makes them understand that the breaking of them is to their own detriment as spiritual beings. And he does not speak only of keeping. He speaks expressly also of teaching. This, indeed, shows how deeply he felt the importance of the new commandments. They would open a new practical way of life to his followers besides giving them a new philosophy. They were not only moral commandments, they were rather moral viewpoints, and, therefore, it was exceedingly important and necessary to inculcate and teach them in an intelligent and reasonable way. Through them, a new age was to begin in the history not only of individuals, but also of nations and humanity in general. In his closing words, Jesus once more advises his followers to see to it that their respect for the divine law, their dikaiosyn or righteousness, be indeed much, much greater than that of the scribes and Pharisees, who content themselves with fulfilling the many paragraphs of the written law. The commandments of the kingdom of heaven were to be engraved upon the hearts of the disciples. Now, which are these new commandments of Jesus that you think so revolutionizing? We shall see presently. Side by side with his own comments, Jesus points out the old ones, thus showing us in a glaring light how great a difference there is between his new teaching and the old Jewish philosophy of life.